Alright, so today what we're going to talk about is the creation of an American empire. Now, we usually, unless you're, really critical of American foreign policy, we usually don't hear the word empire applied to the United States. But what we're going to see is, after the conclusion of westward expansion, the closing of the frontier in 1890, after the Gilded Age, what we're going to see is the United States will actually expand overseas, in part because we start producing so much stuff. We need markets for other goods. And if we look here on this map, what we're going to see is between 1865 and 1903, we're going to add Alaska, Hawaii, Midway, Samoa, Wake, Guam, the Philippines, the Panama Canal Zone around 1903, Puerto Rico, and we're going to get dominion over Cuba. Cuba will become something of an American protectorate. Now, part of why we do this is to project our national influence. We're trying to break out onto the world stage. But understand, the United States is a latecomer, very, very much latecomer to what would be called the age of imperialism. Germany, only a nation since 1870. It had been Prussia and various German states, but what we now know as the modern nation of Germany only exists in 1870. We're going to see, they're going to have numerous Pacific islands. They're going to have stuff in China. We're going to see Britain by this time already has Australia, New Zealand, parts of New Guinea, Malaya, India, large swaths of Africa. We're going to see, the French, the Belgians have stuff in Africa. Vietnam is currently known as French Indochina. China itself will be gobbled up. Stupid mouse thingy. China itself will be gobbled up by the various European powers. The United States arrives particularly late, and it starts because after the American Civil War, William Seward, wants to transition, the United States, he wants to start having an actual foreign policy. Historically, foreign policy had been built around the Monroe Doctrine of 1824, which said that the United States would not tolerate, pardon me, I'm just going to belch on screen, that's lovely, would not tolerate the involvement of, European power in the, in the Western Hemisphere. We were going to be the dominant power. And that had pretty much been our foreign policy up until this time. But Seward wants an American empire. He believed in the idea of manifest destiny, which, if you remember, the idea that the United States should occupy the East Coast to the West Coast. But now he says we should take that further. We're the land of liberty, freedom, all of this stuff, America. We should take this out beyond the continental United States. So we're going to see in 1867, he's going to buy Alaska. And Alaska, it's weird, I can see Russia from my house. 1866, Alaska is actually owned by Russia, and so we buy this thing from Russia, and quite literally, it's called Seward's Folly because people are like, what the hell are you going to do with this? You bought Alaska, we don't know what to do with it. It's 2015, we have Alaska, we don't know what to do with it. Which, by the way, speaking of, we can see Russia from our house. Who said it? Okay, I'm pretty sure you just said Sarah Palin. That's not true. Sarah Palin never said, I can see Russia from my house. Tina Fey on the Saturday Night Live skits said, I can see Russia from my house. But the thing is, the Saturday Night Live skits, and hopefully we'll get into this depending upon how far we get in the course, the Saturday Night Live skits are so pervasive, so popular, that's more what Americans remember about our politicians. We remember the caricatures more than we actually remember the actual politician. Sarah Palin never said that, but for most Americans, Tina Fey is exactly what we think of. So, of course, everyone associates Sarah Palin with that. We're going to annex the Midway Islands. And Seward, once he's out, Seward wants to focus stuff here in the Pacific. But we start shifting more to a Caribbean-based foreign policy. I apologize. We might have to split this lecture up. My voice is going for some reason. Apparently, yesterday in my other 11:03, I decided to squeak like I'm in puberty again. Now I can barely talk, so we'll see how long we can do this. Now, the idea of why we want to do this, in part, whether in the Pacific or in the Caribbean, is we need markets for goods, especially after the Gilded Age. We start just producing so much stuff that, Americans can't consume everything. I mean, there's only a finite amount of steel or cloth or wool or textiles or, cocaine toothache drops. I mean, there's only a certain amount of that stuff we can consume before, we all die from cocaine overdose. So we need a market for all those goods. And we look in the Caribbean, and the Caribbean historically traded with Europe. We said we wouldn't allow foreign powers to establish colonies. We said we wouldn't allow foreign invasions. But we never did anything about the trade. So what we're going to see is the idea is to try to move that trade from Europe and try to bring it over to the United States. But we see the Panic of 1893. And that panic, what that means is part of how you want to get trade with a foreign nation is you want to say, I will buy your goods, you buy our goods. Consider this. I remember when I was an undergraduate years and years and years ago, a paper said that we were going to be at war with China by now. Well, that's never happened, and it never will because we're too economically dependent. Look at, your handy-dandy cellular phone. Did I really just say cellular? Your smartphone. Where is it made? Mine says, I don't know if you can see, but right there, made in China. Guess where Chinese cars are made? They're made in the United States. Economically, we're too dependent. That's kind of what we want to do here, is create a sort of economic dependency. But with the Depression of 1893, what we're going to see is we now need to once again get people to buy American-made goods. So the tariffs come back. We see this now desire, okay, we want you to buy our goods, but we really can't afford to buy your goods. And so we get more one-sided trading relationships. Now, out of this economic competition, we start seeing some confrontations with European nations. And the most important and most overlooked is in 1895, there's a border dispute between Venezuela and British Guyana. Well, the United States, we trade with Venezuela, so we back them. Britain obviously backs their colony. Now, we almost go to war in 1895, but at the last minute, everything's averted. And the two nations agreed to work together in a spirit of international cooperation. This is hugely important because this creates Anglo-American partnership. We still see to this day. We see it in World War I. We see it in World War II. We see it in the Korean War. We see it in the Cold War. We see it in, Tony Blair sending, troops along to help the American invasion of Iraq. Heck, we see it in the fact that, was it 3 or 4 years ago, Tony Blair came and spoke here. It was actually years ago this month. Tony Blair spoke here at OSU and gave an address. And I remember my wife and I went to see it because it was the most hilarious thing because it was on Halloween. So here's my wife listening to a former British Prime Minister dressed as Catwoman in a leather catsuit. I could not have been more proud. But that's just how my wife rolls. But it's the fact that we have such a tight partnership. It's all born here in 1895. We see a correction in American history in the sense, okay, we're that breakaway colony. We're that breakaway colony. We fight a war, the American Revolution. We fight a war, the War of 1812. There's that whole, the British kind of helping the South. But now all past problems are forgiven and we create a new, what is it Tony Blair once said, a special relationship that exists to this very day. Now, when we talk about, the Age of Empire, understand it's not that great. In the sense that the Age of Empire, imperialism does not take into account the people who are actually living in, those particular places. What I mean is there was Eddie Izzard did a comedy stand-up routine where he said, the thing about imperialism, it's all about flags. He said that, the thing is, Europe has flags, Africa doesn't. So people come in, do you have a flag? No. Boom, here's a flag. You belong to us now. Understand, imperialism is, let's dredge up that old idea of, and I just literally had a brain fart, mercantilism. There we go. The idea that a colony exists to benefit the mother country. What we're going to see is that's how imperialism worked. In the sense that, if we're going to have, an empire or adversely, influence stuff, we don't care about who's actually living there. We care about how they benefit us. We see that with Hawaii. In 1875, we have tariff reciprocity. In fact, we don't even have a tax on sugar. which is amazing because now we have a good, really cheap source of sugar. In return, they promised to not have a tax on our goods, and so we now have a fantabulous market. Yes, I just said fantabulous, not a word, but it is now. Market for American goods. But then we sort of close off the spigot. 1890, we end that trading status. We hike up a tax on sugar. Americans no longer buy Hawaiian sugar, and poverty sweeps the island. That poverty then affects, American planters who live on the island trying to make a living. So they do what any American does. They grab their guns and they stage a revolution. And it just so happens that we have naval ships in Pearl Harbor, one of the best anchorages in the world. So we send ashore Marines. We send ashore a landing party. And in 1893, the Hawaiian Queen is deposed, and the new pro-American, American-backed government seeks annexation. We punt for a bit, but we finally accept it in 1898. Slowly but surely, we're gaining that American empire. We're also going to see other European confrontations in the 1870s. I'm going to click all the way back. We see here the island of Samoa. It's going to be claimed by Britain, by Germany, and by the United States. Well, Britain decides, we don't need it. We have enough islands. Quite literally, Britain owns so much of the planet. The joke was the sun never set on the British Empire. If you're a Sliders fan, if you remember that from the 90s, why? Because God doesn't trust them in the dark. Now, what we're going to see is it's left between Britain, or the United States, and Germany. And finally, 1899, we just chop the island in half and we say, okay, here's going to be German Samoa, here's going to be American Samoa. We're starting to get these islands. We're starting to expand our empire. It's nothing like what any European nation has. Consider this. Belgium, small, tiny, Belgium owns the frickin' Congo right now. I mean, what we have is small and relatively pathetic, but it grows and it grows and it grows. And the real big driving force as to why we want an overseas empire, which understand, the heart of this new imperialism is threefold. It's power, here, let me move this over here so you can see my hand, there we go. It's power, it's balance of power, and it's trade. Now, with power, it's the sense of how powerful is a nation. How much power can it project? Balance of power, the relationships between two nations. In the sense, in what would be called the scramble for Africa. Whoever had the most of the continent wielded the most commanding influence. So it's this idea of we don't want to unjustly, or rather unnecessarily, change the balance of power. And then there's trade in the sense we expect these colonies to both provide a source of cheap raw materials as well as a cheap source of labor and a market for our products. But how do we go about that? How do we actually achieve our designs of an empire? And thus comes, a book that I really want you to remember, especially if you're a military history fan. It's written by this guy, Alfred Thayer Mahan, and he's a lecturer at the U.S. Naval War College, and he writes, for the time, the most influential work on military history since Karl von Clausewitz wrote his On War back in the Napoleonic era. It's published in 1890, and the book basically says, if you look throughout history, the wealth and power of a nation is based on its navy. That nations need empires to thrive, empires to survive, and to do it, you must have a strong navy. He says, look at Britain. Okay, they dominate the world. How they have the Royal Navy is the largest, most powerful navy on the planet. How is Germany, recently unified, becoming a world power? It has, at this point, the second largest navy. They have a huge overseas empire. You have to have navies to protect that trade. You've got trade routes. You need ships to protect them. And so what he says is, okay, we need a modern, steam-driven steel navy. And we need bases to refuel from. Currently, ships are steam-powered, but their fuel source is coal. And coal, it's inefficient, it takes a lot of it, it's cumbersome, it limits your range. So if we want to project our power, say, in Asia, in time of war, we need bases in Hawaii. That's why we're going to annex Hawaii. We need stuff in Midway Island. We need stuff in Guam. We need stuff in the Philippines so that our ships can go badoop, 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 and finally get over that. We need our own empire to protect our trade routes, to protect our trading interests. And this book is going to be really widely read, not just in the United States, but over the entire world. And it ignites a naval revolution because it convinces people that, look, we need a strong navy, we need big navies. I'm talking with my hands, but half of it's off screen, Wacky waving. Hang on, let me try to do the Family Guy thing. Wacky waving, inflatable, flailing arm, flailing tube man. There you go. I'm going to do something to spice it up. For the United States, we embark on building what we're going to call the new steel navy. For the American history, today we have the largest, most battle proficient, navy on the planet. When we want to project our power, when there's problems with, Syria or Iran, we drop a carrier battle group in the Persian Gulf. When when Kim Jong-un decides to test a missile, we plop a carrier battle group in the Sea of Japan. However, historically, what would happen with the Navy? We would build a few ships, fight our war, scrap the ships, go to war again, build a few ships, end the war, scrap the ships, and on and on. So we're going to see that with the Civil War, I'm going to jump here, the Navy, it's really, really small. We've got some sailing ships, we've got some steamships, we've got some ironclad warships. But the 1870s, the Gilded Age, Carnegie Steel, we have the ability to mass build, cheaper, better, more structurally sound ships. So we embark on a naval campaign in 1883, and the Navy starts construction on 4 new steel cruisers, and this is what kicks it off. And tell me what's not like the other. There's the Atlanta, the Boston, the Chicago, and the Dolphin. All are cruisers. They're known as the ABCD Squadron, but 3 cities and a fish. I know, technically a mammal. How do you do that when it's the Navy? Who knows? But if you look at the Dolphin here, what do you notice? Well, okay, sure, it's a steamship, but look at the rigging, look at the masts. You can sail this as a 3-masted ship. The thing is, even in the 1880s, 1890s, most ships before Mahon's work were designed to work in tandem as either sailing ships or steamships, however the need arose. But with this new steel navy, we want to transition from a coast defense force, this idea it's there only if we're attacked, to now we want, large ocean-going ships, we want sea-going battleships, and we want a 2-ocean navy. There's no Panama Canal just yet, so I'm going to go all the way back to my map. There we go. So, if you've got a ship in California, stay tuned, this is going to happen. And you need ships over in Cuba. You have to sail 14,000 nautical miles. At best, a 3 or a 2-month voyage. You've got to make that, and that's rough on ships, that's rough on men. That burns out components. It's very exhausting. So the United States, in the absence of a canal, embarks on what it sees as a more palatable solution. We build a 2-ocean navy. The idea, have one navy in the Atlantic, one navy in the Pacific, and both can be self-sufficient. Here's where the Gilded Age comes in. The robber barons might suck. It might suck to work in Carnegie Steel Plant, but it's necessary for the transition of the United States into modernity. We're going to see the United States in 1899, the 12th largest navy in the world. 4 years later, in 1893, it's up to 7th. And by 1900, 14 years before the First World War, the American Navy is the 3rd largest in the world. The only navies bigger are Britain with the 1st and the Germans with the 2nd. We have moved up, and in a short 11-year period, radically transformed our military capability, and in doing so, have now made it where we can project our power across the entire planet. This is revolutionary. We have not seen this kind of transformation at all in American history. I want to go back to that old History Channel argument, not the aliens, but the what they call the man moment machine. Let's say person time technology. We'll be a bit more PC about it. Well, let's look at it this way. In 1890, you've got Alfred Thayer Mahan. You have the technology, you have steel. You have all this stuff. We're building this new stuff. We now want foreign policy. And then amongst all that, we then have a spark that brings the United States onto the world scene. We bring the United States, into the place as a world power. Now, what we're going to see is, there's the Panic of 1893, and it's kind of worldwide. So what we're going to see is Spain is still lingering on. It's a shell of its former self. Its colonial empires are dashed, but it still has a few. And then Cuba in February rebels. And I mean, it's pretty violent. We're going to see the rise of the concentration camp. Not the Deutsche Arbeitslager, not the German work camps, but classically in this day and age, when we say concentration camp, we literally mean a camp where a group of people are going to be concentrated. There will be death, there will be disease, famine, stuff like that, but they're not death. Death happens by accident. Death is not the actual design. Now we're going to see the rise of what will be called yellow journalism, an idea where people like William Randolph Hearst of the New York Herald, where they want to try to get Americans to want to get involved in the war, to try to trigger a war between the United States and Spain. And what they would do is they would, think of clickbait. If you don't know what clickbait is, you might see an article on CNN, and it's got a really tantalizing title. You click on it, and, you find out the paper actually has nothing to do with it. Well, today we can read the news for free. But in the 1890s, you got to pay for the newspaper. So they would want to create, in effect, clickbait. So you'd buy the paper, and then you'd get pissed off. In addition, modern journalism supposedly reflects on facts. But here, journalism sought to create facts to try to, get you to do something. And so we're going to see that, he's going to talk about atrocities that are going to be exaggerated or flat made up, just to try to piss you off, just to try to, get you incensed. Some of these, we're going to see things like over here, firing squads. Or over here, the idea of Spaniards strip-searching women on American, steamships. And this particularly would have just been, enraging. Because as I've kind of dropped hints, over the course, it's the Victorian era. You don't even see your spouse naked. To see a woman naked would be absolutely horrible. In fact, I'm going to do a 19th century striptease for you. Okay, ready? This is probably not going to work. Hang on, I'm a fat guy. This is Oh no, you can see my ankle. Gasp. I might be being facetious, but only to a point. Ladies, this day and age, you would be wearing, multiple layers, petticoats, quite literally about 5 layers is the actual standard. I mean, you didn't, if you're not going out your corset, your bodice, your petticoat, all this stuff, you're not properly dressed. To see ankle, and let me adjust my camera, to show off even your ankle in the 1890s would be considered absolutely risque. Sorry about how to do that. I normally do that in my traditional classes. It's a bit easier to do there, so here, bear with me. Hopefully, you at least got a chuckle out of it. But to see this, now there's no photographic evidence, there's no, this actually happened, there's no, but to see the drawing of a woman naked was enough in the minds of Americans to, to get people to want to do something, to try to want to intervene. Now, we see a little bit of Spanish yellow journalism in the sense of, good old Uncle Sam here, who that face, kind of looks like your creepy like a creepy pedophile or, your creepy drunken uncle, one of the two. But on the whole, for the Spaniards, it doesn't do anything for the United States. But in the United States, it creates the desire for intervention. Now, here's the thing. People in the United States, 1895, then 1896, 1897, 1898, want intervention. McKinley was a Civil War veteran. He knew what war was like. He did not want to go to war. He knew it would be horrible. But he has to respond to protect American interests. And so he takes a page out of Mahan's book. 1898, he's going to send the battleship Maine to Havana Harbor, both to safeguard American interests, but also just as a show of force of, hey, we have a navy, we have a military, we can project our own power, we can project our power. You guys might want to think about stopping this stupid war. That's the hope. But what we're going to see is that, we're going to see a series of events that will eventually trigger war. February 9, 1898, Hearst in the New York Herald publishes a letter stolen from the Spanish ambassador Dupuy de Lome. And in this de Lome letter, the Spanish ambassador says, look, McKinley is timid, he's weak, he's ineffective, we don't have to worry about him. Now, the letter was stolen by somebody that Hearst paid. And there's an interesting thing here. You've got Theodore Roosevelt, sorry, wrong thing, who, as the Undersecretary of the Navy, is saying things like President McKinley has the backbone of a chocolate eclair. I don't know how they made stuff in the 1890s. There's bones in eclairs, that's a problem. At least where I come from, that's a problem. But you've got him saying things like backbone of a chocolate eclair. Here's the thing. We can insult our president. That's totally fine. It is not acceptable for somebody else to insult our president. And so, that was the thing. So Americans start getting riled up. Then February 15, 1898. Not 6 days later, the unthinkable happens. The battleship Maine explodes in Havana Harbor. Now, why does it blow up? Immediately that next day, Hearst is publishing stuff talking about Spanish sabotage, talking about the Spanish wanting to blow the ship up. His headline, "Remember the Maine, to hell with Spain." There's no Facebook, there's no Snopes, there's no way to check this. People get incensed. After the war, they raise the ship, and they find out what had happened was actually a fairly common occurrence. These ships are stocked with coal. The coal was kept near the powder magazines. Coal dust is flammable. One spark, you set off the coal dust, it burns the coal, it sets off the powder magazine, your whole ship explodes. That's what happened. They found out the blast is directed outwards, not inwards. The Spanish didn't sink it, but we find out too late. What we're going to see is in American history, or in the American governmental system, Congress declares war. We've now moved to a point where the president can send troops for emergency things, or this, that, or the other thing, but historically, Congress declares war. Congress wanted to declare war. The American people overwhelmingly wanted to go to war. McKinley did not, and in fact, representatives had to pull him aside in April and say, "Look, Mr. President, the United States is going to war whether you like it or not. If you want re-election, we suggest you ask us in the customary manner for a declaration of war." So we draft a war message in early April. We state we're going to war to free Cuba. We want no territorial acquisition from Cuba. And that's the important thing, from Cuba. I'm wagging my finger. I'm the penguin from the Blues Brothers. I feel like I should, I say Blues Brothers. I feel like I should do something Marty McFly-ish, but, who knows? Give me just a second. I have something for that. Okay, so as I mentioned, let's see, where was I? As it is technically October 21, 2015, Marty McFly Day, boom, and boom. Yay for being a kid at heart and LEGO Dimensions, right? So, where was I? So, April 25, the United States declares war on Spain. McKinley asks, begrudgingly, Congress overwhelmingly says yes. This becomes a national fad. The thing was, we said this was a splendid little war because it was popular, it was fun, and most of all, it was short. It starts in April. Combat lasts from the 1st of May to the 17th of July. It is a really small, self-contained war. And it's something that, this just becomes a national fixation. Now, if we look at the Army, and I need to blow through some of this, what we're going to see is, it relies on a volunteer system, not unlike the Civil War. And so McKinley asks for 125,000 volunteers. We're going to see 1 million will actually volunteer, including around 300,000 Civil War veterans. Now think about that for a second. 300,000 Civil War veterans. This is 1898. Let's say you are, 18 in 1865 when the war ends. Okay, so I'm going to do math. Bear with me. So it's carry the 2 times the remainder. That's what? 1847, say, is when you're born, right? 1847. It's 1898. That means, you are 51 years old. Think about that. And these people are volunteering. They know what war's like, and they're willing to do it. You're going to see such kooky stuff as Theodore Roosevelt, who is the Assistant Secretary of the Navy, resigns his commission and uses his own money to create the first United States volunteer cavalry, the Rough Riders. And basically, this is a cowboy, literally, they put the ad out. He wants cowboys, rough riding types, New York businessmen who can, ride horses and play polo. I mean, that's, it's absolutely crazy. But this war, understand, comes at that turning edge of modernity. They're going to dress and act like it's the Civil War, but we're going to see the weapon, the early progenitors of the weapons that will be fighting in the First World War. And along with that, many of the weapons, some of them are going to be new smokeless rifles. Smokeless magazine rifles had only been adopted by militaries circa 1886. The United States, we adopt ours, the Krag Jorgensen. We know it as the Krag. It's a Norwegian rifle, but we're going to, we Americanicize it. Whatever. Would that be anglicized? Whatever. But the Krag Jorgensen, 1892. But half of our troops still have to use the old trapdoor Springfield, which is a single-shot black powder weapon. It's not a musket, it's a breech loader. But consider this. In a war where the Spaniards have belt-fed machine guns, we're using trapdoor, black powder breech-loading rifles. When some people say, look, we need smokeless stuff, the Army will say, well, look, you fired, it's got a huge cloud of powder, or smoke, right? Well, yeah. When I say smokeless, by the way, think of a modern gun. You shoot it, there's a little wisp of smoke, that's it. Black powder, it's this huge, thick stuff. And I mean, if you were to fire 3 shots in about a minute, you literally couldn't see the smoke was so dense. The Army said, well, look, just fire off a few shots and hide behind the smoke. Never mind some Spanish machine gunners just, bop, 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 with a machine gun right into the smoke and kill you. We're going to see things like, well, even machine guns. The U.S. Army takes a grand total of 4 to Cuba. 2 Gatling guns and 2 modern machine guns. That is it. Our artillery, half of it are breech-loading conversions of old Civil War artillery pieces. And then there's the problem of African-American troops. In the sense, this is the reconstructed South. It's, 1898, 2 years off of Plessy v. Ferguson. And now we're going to, where's Cuba? Is it north or south? It's south. That means, we're going to embark from places like Florida. You're going to have to send armed black troops marching through a region where they can't go to the same school, can't go to the same water fountain, can't ride the trolley cars, can't vote, are fully segregated. This could cause a lot of problems. It doesn't, but there's always, always, always that fear. If we look at the battles, the first one will be the Battle of Manila Bay, where Roosevelt, and here's how unprepared we are. We declare war on April 25. The Secretary of the Navy is on vacation. So without authorization, Roosevelt orders the U.S. Asiatic Squadron, which is stationed in Hong Kong, to sally forth, go to Manila Bay in the Philippines, and engage, the Spanish squadron. Now what we're going to see, it's a really brief naval battle. The Spanish fleet there is horrendously outmatched, and it's just all destroyed in short order. In fact, the only American casualty is one guy who dies of heat stroke. The battle becomes an overnight sensation. George Dewey's name, they're going to put it on music, on books, on cigarette packets, on tobacco, on chewing gum, all this stuff. And it becomes so, immortalized that we're going to see that his ship, the Olympia, is currently today preserved in Philadelphia today. We actually kept his ship around because we realized as a nation it's just so important for our national history. The Spanish-American War is, I argue, one of the most crucial military conflicts of American history because it's this war that transitions us to being a world power. Along with that, as this is the first time I've mentioned the Spanish-American War, if you're taking notes, I don't know if you're taking notes on this, I hope you are, draw, underline, italicize, star, and bold this phrase. The Spanish-American War and the Mexican-American War are not the same thing. For those of you that are laughing, yes, every semester I get 3 to 5 students who will give me great ideas about marching into Mexico City. Too bad Mexico's not in Cuba. Understand, Spanish-American War is, the conflict over Cuba that then creates the United States as a world power. Mexico, I want you to know, in the essay about the Civil War, by the way, hint, there will be an essay about the Civil War, but I'm not too worried about you knowing about it as an ID term. Now, Here's why Manila Bay is significant. One, beyond the fact it's an early quick victory, beyond George Dewey is made famous. He lands troops. We seize Manila. And now here's the thing. The Filipinos had rose in rebellion against the Spaniards. They're fighting their own war. They see the United States as liberators. But now we don't know what to do. We have single-handedly, in one naval engagement, taken over the Philippines. So it's the question, do we just let the Filipinos have it, much like we're planning to with Cuba? Or do we replace the Spaniards? We don't know just yet. And this is actually going to set the stage for our first true war for empire when the United States, spoiler alert, will decide to subjugate the Philippines. But we'll come back to that in a few slides. Most of the other fighting of the Spanish-American War is focused specifically on Cuba. Our guys will land. And the landing when in 1898 in June, is an absolute disaster. We can't take enough horses because we don't have enough ships. Our guys have no idea what to do. In fact, the few horses they do take, what they have to do, because these ships don't have landing ramps, they literally just have to shove the horses over the side. Half of them swim out to sea. I mean, they just start swimming back out into the Atlantic Ocean. In fact, Theodore Roosevelt's personal horse, Little Texas, starts doing the same. Somebody sees it from shore and starts blowing a bugle, and the horse spins around to go to the bugle. But, I mean, even the horses are not that well trained. Bear in mind, we just declared war in April. At most, these guys have had 3 to 5 weeks training. They don't even fully know what they're going to do yet. Now, our guys are helped by Cuban insurgents. And we're going to see things. There are going to be a few skirmishes. The big one other than this would be Las Guasimas, which will be June 17. And we're going to see the Spaniards are better equipped. They're better fighters, but they have worse morale. And out of Las Guasimas, Las Guasimas would be, June 24th, right here comes my favorite story from the Spanish-American War. Understand, people still saw, as Union and Confederate, we're not quite thinking in terms of one nation just yet. And so many of the officers, some are going to be Union, some are going to be ex-Confederate. They have battle experience. And one, Joseph Wheeler, the American cavalry commander, was an old Confederate cavalryman. And he was kind of delirious with yellow fever at Las Guasimas. Malaria, probably. And, when the Spanish line finally breaks and runs, he is reported to have said, "Come on, boys, we've got the damn Yankees on the run." So delirious, he completely forgets what war he's even in. But they break. And so they start entrenching on the San Juan Heights, which protect Santiago de Cuba. And here we're going to see, the entire American army just smashes in and charges up these hills. Now, we usually say San Juan Hill. That's the hill complex we're attacking. But the Rough Riders actually attack the neighboring Kettle Hill so they can, flank San Juan so the rest of the American army can attack. The Spanish are well entrenched. They have more stuff. They have better stuff. But we're better supplied, we have more morale, and eventually we just overrun their positions. But it also shows that our army will need significant improvements. One of the things, is things like, there's a regiment, the 20th Massachusetts, I believe. Sorry, the 2nd Massachusetts. The Battle of El Caney, which is going on behind the Spanish lines, equipped with those black powder weapons, has to be pulled off the lines because Spanish artillery can just zero in. Our guys take heavy casualties, but the Spaniards cannot stand. And so they fall back. From here, they get pushed back and back until they have to surrender at Santiago because the Spanish Navy will soon be destroyed. If we look, a couple of other things about this war, like I said, transition of modernity. We have modern magazine repeating rifles. But we're using Gatling guns, not modern machine guns. They're also clothed in blue, in wool, in 110-degree heat. So you're literally wearing this just heavy blue stuff that makes you really discernible amongst the green grass. Most Americans, 345 will die of combat through the entire war. But 2,500 are going to die from disease and die from heat stroke. We're going to see here, these are the Rough Riders once they finally get to San Juan Hill including Theodore Roosevelt here in the center. And this war will be significant. One of the significances is it will catapult him to national fame. This is what will make him President of the United States. Now, pardon me, if the Spanish are, being, squished in there, their navy then tries to sortie to try to escape. They realize Cuba is going to be lost. They realize the army is going to be written off, but they want to try to get the navy out. And we're going to see that the U.S. Navy, it's better technologically, it's better equipped, and they get another battleship because the battleship Oregon makes it from California all the way around South America. 14,000 miles in 66 days. It gets there, I think, 2 days before the battle. So on July 3rd, the Spanish ships come out. They fight a naval engagement. They then stop for an hour lunch break, then fight again. And the Spanish Navy is completely destroyed. Ironically, the last Spanish ship to sally forth and be destroyed was the Cristoforo Colombo. Kind of symbolic, Columbus, air quote, discovered America. Now his ship is at the bottom of, the Caribbean Sea. With no navy, with no reinforcements, with Spain unable to do anything, the Spanish army in Cuba surrenders with Santiago. And with that, the war is basically over. I mean, there's not much else left to do. And we're going to see that U.S. losses, 2,910 dead, but only 345 from combat. The fact is, these guys have to wait around till December to leave. And Americans, we have no resistance to malaria, no resistance to yellow fever, no resistance to these various tropical diseases, stuff like that. So what I want to do now, it's 41 minutes. The lecture's almost over. I think I'm just going to put up, I think we'll finish this, and then I'll just put up like a brief 10 or 15 minute video, just kind of break it up into chunks. Just the other video probably tonight or follow tomorrow, and then we'll go ahead and finish out with the Progressive Era. But if we want to end up, just round up the war, what we're going to see is on August 12, 1898, that's pretty much the end of hostilities. I mean, there's no more fighting. We're going to send stuff. We're going to take over Guam. We're going to take Puerto Rico. Why? We've got troops going to Cuba. We don't need them, so let's go ahead and snap off Puerto Rico. We've got troops going to the Philippines. We don't need them. Snap off Guam. And a third Treaty of Paris ends the war on December 10, 1898. And what I love about this, it's historical irony that I don't think anybody at the time realized. But the Treaty of Paris, it's really important in American history because if you look, the three critical events of American history in, prior to the 20th century were all determined by treaties of Paris. The first ends the 7 Years' War that starts the desire for an American Revolution. The second ends the American Revolution, guarantees us our independence. And this third births us as a world power. What we're going to see is European nations that were there on behalf of Spain wanted to say, look, it's America. We can't count this as a win. Spain should be given everything back. We've got that special relationship. As it looks like I'm kind of picking your nose. Boop. We've got that special relationship now with Britain. Britain goes to bat for us and says, no, the United States soundly defeated Spain. They have every right to all of those possessions. And so the United States gets dominion over the Philippines. We're now going to administer Cuba, and Guam and Puerto Rico are annexed. And what's going to happen now is what we're going to see. This creates a desire for the United States. We now want to expand overseas. We now want to get in on this age of imperialism, and we now have the ability to do so. You know what? I said I was going to break it up. Let's see if we can't finish this up in around 10 minutes. We might just skip through a couple of slides. Now, I mentioned that imperialism, is not really beneficial for the people being empired. I know, I just made that a verb. And part, you've got to understand the racist component. The idea, if any of you read The Jungle Book and know who Rudyard Kipling was, he espoused an idea called the white man's burden. And the idea of the white man's burden, it's the idea of the white man to go and take civilization out to, to go take civilization out to the savage ends of the earth. The idea that, you're not living properly, we're going to do it for you. And you're going to see this mindset and stuff like, Pear's soap which really took up that idea. And, some of the idea that, soap or civilization, we can make black people white people. We can make Asians white people. We can make Indians white people. That it's possible, just as we supposedly assimilated Native Americans, we can assimilate all of this other stuff. And so out of this, it just occurs to me, I literally have this twice. So, hey, that's one fewer slide we've got to do. Out of this stuff comes the question, what do we do with the Philippines? And, before the ink is dry on, the treaty, we're at war over the Philippines. McKinley decides that he didn't know what to do, but that God spoke to him and told him to take the Philippines, that he needed to Christianize the Philippines. The problem is they're Spanish Catholics. They're already been Christianized. Now what we're going to see is because of that, these guys are going to be, kept out. What we're going to do is American troops in the Philippines keep the Filipinos out of the peace process. Keep them out of Manila. They're not allowed to come in. And so what we're going to see is February 4, 1898, some Filipino troops cross an American checkpoint, American troops fire, and the war begins and becomes a declared war on June the 2nd, 1899. Now, understand a couple of things. This, we can call it the First Vietnam. The army of the First Philippine Republic is destroyed by the end of the year, but it keeps on as a guerrilla warfare. We also see it First Vietnam because at home, there's not going to be protests, but the war is not popular. Understand, racism is a big component. We're trying to tell people, look, we can make dark-skinned people like whites. But for many people who already don't like the fact there's African Americans in the South, and there's the issue of segregation, why are we going to bring in more? Hate to say it, but if you read American soldiers' stuff from the Philippines, they use the N-word to describe the Filipino constantly. Now, what we're going to see is, it's almost a 1-2 punch. We're fighting in the Philippines. Then in 1900, we get the Boxer Rebellion, because now we decide, hey, which, by the way, I don't know about you, I get Boxer Rebellions at least, a couple of times a week, but there you go. I know, cheap joke, but I love to make it. What we're going to see is the United States decides that, look, if we're down here in the Philippines, remember, Europe is carving up China. We decide we want to try to get in on that. We want, trade in China. So we come up with the open door and say, well, look, just because we don't have territory, we should still have the same trading rights and stuff like that. The Europeans more or less, oh, that's cute. No. But then in 1900, a Chinese nationalist organization, the Boxers, rise up with an idea to throw out all of the foreign powers. If you look at this map, look at all the big cities. These, in parentheses, these are when nations literally bought these cities. Tianjin, Britain, 1860. Qingdao, Germany, 1898. Shanghai, Britain, 1842. Nanjing, France, 1858. Shashi, Japan, 1895. Over and over and over. And what we're going to see is the Boxer Rebellion, it's typically concentrated here. And the idea was, again, these guys start murdering Christian missionaries. They want to drive the Europeans out. And we're going to see that, all these nations had a military presence in China. So in the besieged city of Peking, you're going to see American, British, German, French, Japanese, Austro-Hungarian, and Italian troops all fighting together. They withstand the siege, and the rebellion by 1901 collapses. Now, why this is important is twofold. One, this is the creation of a United States policy of direct intervention in foreign affairs. If we see that rebellion in a certain country threatens our trade agreements, or that there's a problem that needs to be solved by, what's the quote we use now, boots on the ground, we're going to do it. It starts in 1900. There's no declaration of war. There's no, exit strategy in that. It's just simply a case of we will send troops, and many of these troops are going to be pulled out of the Philippines. From then until World War II, we have an American military presence in China. The term you might have heard it, China Marines. We'll have gunboats patrolling the Yangtze River. And so now we're tied directly to the affairs of Asia. We'll come back to that in a second. We're also going to see from a non-Asian perspective a mischance for unity. Look at these combatants: America, Britain, Germany, France, Japan, Italy. Germany is going to be fighting everybody else in that list 14 years later. 14 years later, the First World War begins. Here we have a point we all can fight together, but 14 years later, we're all going to fight against each other. And here are the American troops at the siege of Peking. Now, I briefly want to just finish up the Philippine-American War. We've got plenty of time. This will only take about 5 or 6 more minutes. Is understand the United States begins war atrocities. I mean, this is we see those atrocities. Remember, talk about Native Americans, but here we're going to see a lot of stuff. We're going to see the use of what will be called the dum-dum bullet. If any of you are hunters, and I know one, I think generally there's at least one or two of you. What does a soft point do? What do you want to use that when you shoot an animal? It mushrooms. It imparts more stopping velocity. It creates one hell of a wound, but boom and down. The Hague Convention of, I believe, 1899 forbade its use. But Britain and, in the Boer War in the United States, we don't sign the Hague Convention. So we use them. You'll have soldiers purposely cutting off the copper jackets on their bullets to impart grievous wounds to try to stop these guys. We're going to see, the use of concentration camps. The United States, we see here, we will use concentration camps. Again, they're not Arbeitslager, but they are camps where people are going to be concentrated. Why? Because if you remove citizens from a region that's in rebellion and you concentrate them, you deprive insurgents of their foodstuffs. And without their support, surely the insurgents must have to give up. So goes the theory. But then it gets worse. On the island of Samar in 1901, what's going to happen is about 30 or 40 American troops are going to be killed. And it's called the Massacre of Samar. So in response, this guy, General Jacob H. Smith, issues an order saying that American troops are to kill every Filipino over the age of 10 on the island. Just slaughter. Put the island to the sword, basically. Now, here's the thing. When we think about this, with regard to, say, Nazi Germany, World War II, there's the idea, well, why don't they just not do it? Why don't they not follow orders? We have this idea, and I'm not anti-military, but my job as your instructor is to give you, I'm going to tell you the bad stuff of American history, not because I don't love our country, but because I want to make sure this damn sure doesn't happen again. Some American officers refuse. Most don't. Most comply. Firing squads range all over the island of Samar. It takes a few months before the U.S. government puts a stop to it. Smith will be court-martialed. He'll be driven out of the army. But before he is, thousands of Filipino men and women will be killed. And again, they're more or less taking people that look like they're teenagers, standing them up against the wall and shooting them. This is the United States Army. That all but breaks the resistance. The Filipinos eventually give up. They agree to submit, and we're going to see that in 1902, June 16th, we're going to end our quote-unquote military occupation. On July 4, President Roosevelt, stay tuned, President Roosevelt issues a pardon to all Filipinos who might have taken up arms against the United States. And it becomes American policy that sometime in the 1940s, we will give them independence. So we're a bit more benevolent than Europe in the sense we don't plan to hold on to this forever, but we're participating in executions just like them. I mean, we're going to see like the Belgian Congo. There's going to be all sorts of summary executions. And then, to get away from executions, they would say, well, we want you to kill, however many people. And we want you to bring hands back as, to show you've done. In the Belgian Congo, they just lop off hands from live people, present the hands. There you go. We don't go that bad. Our stuff, it's limited to this pretty much. There's going to be a few other massacres. There's going to be a few other rebellions, but our stuff is fairly limited compared to what Europe does. But understand, it still happens. So, what is the significance of, and by the way, this Philippine insurrection that starts in 1899, it occurs to me, this is what I mean by the Philippine-American War. I forget on the ID term, I use it interchangeably. Philippine-American War, Philippine insurrection, whichever, it's the same thing. It's where in 1899, February 4, we start fighting. It transitions to, an insurrection, and then we put the insurrection down and take control of the Philippines. So what are the significances of the Spanish-American and Philippine-American Wars? This makes us now both a world power, in the sense we've now beaten Spain. We have a first-rate military. We can project our influence over the entire planet. But we're also an imperial power. We have overseas possessions, numerous islands, the Philippines. We have responsibilities. The army gets modern combat experience. Guess what? We're never going to fight another war clad in blue ever again. We learned that our rifle, the Krag Jorgensen, is horrible. The German-made Mauser, the Spanish used, we called it the Spanish Hornet. We're like, hey, we like that. We take it for ourselves. The Model 19-3 Springfield, which American troops carry in World War I, is a Mauser rifle. We see that, look, how we do things, this whole volunteer system, it doesn't work. We need better infrastructure. But more significant beyond those is that we are now tied to the affairs of Asia with the Philippines. This leads directly to the Second World War, because in 1941, when Japan decides it needs to invade Malaya and the Dutch East Indies to gain control of the southern resource area, they've got to go through the Philippines. We're now tied. We can no longer just say, if Asia wants to do whatever, we don't care. We are now directly tied. We have finally entered the world community. And also for what we're going to talk about in our next lecture, Roosevelt is catapulted to national stardom. And in fact, he's going to become governor of New York. He's such a rising star that the local Republican Party decides they want to bury this guy. They make him the vice president because historically, the Secretary of State was the springboard to be the president, not the vice president. So they thought, okay, we've buried him in the office. But then September 6, 1901, Leon Czolgosz shoots McKinley. He dies on September 14th and becomes the next victim of the zero-year curse. He's reelected in 1900. Roosevelt becomes president. And remember, the robber barons stuff the ballot box basically to get McKinley elected. But Roosevelt wants to break up the trust. Roosevelt is a hugely energetic guy, and he's going to change the power of the presidential office and do two vastly different things in American history. One, he's going to project American power all over the world. He's going to say it's time for the world to know the United States is finally a world power. But he's also, in the progressive era, going to reshape the dynamic between, the government and the citizen. Historically, and I believe it's a quiz question, the most direct relationship you had with the federal government was it delivered your mail. But now he's saying that no, the government needs to help the individual person. The government needs to help regulate big business. The government needs to ensure that everybody gets what he's going to call a square deal. And that is enabled because of his actions in the Spanish-American War. So these two wars are really critical in creating the modern United States. So sorry we ran about 8 minutes long, but I'm glad we got through it. We'll pick up with the progressive era next time, and then that's going to be all you're going to need for this exam. So, this one, the progressive era, and that's where our cutoff for Unit 2 will be. So take off, have a good one, go enjoy Marty McFly Day. Just remember, where we're going, we don't need roads. Bye-bye.